events. We're going to Wichita right after this, and then out to Garden City if anybody wants to come. Short little drive out to Garden City for dinner this evening. So, but excited to start right here in our state's capital city to talk about a man who certainly has an impact on American political thought and conversations around economic freedom and how that plays in each part of our lives and how we benefit from that. And that economic freedom, by the way, is really what Americans for Prosperity Foundation is all about. If you'd like more information, please see either Jen Rizak, myself, and I also want to point out Jim Mullins is back in the saddle. He's been out of commission, had a stroke here recently, but thankful that you're back and you're healthy, wealthy, well, wealthy, you're wise, I know that. So really appreciate you being here. With that, I think we're going to get started with a video, and then I'll introduce our first speaker.
And this money goes to students. You know, in the last 3 years, thousands of people have come up to me and said, boy, we can really use Milton Friedman right now. Well, I think that's because Americans are worried. Our country is over $13 trillion in debt, and most of us think it's going to get worse. The size of government is growing rapidly, and it feels like it's open season on free markets and individual liberty. Our schools are failing, and our children are not getting the kind of personalized, high-quality education that they deserve and that the free market can deliver. It was in times like these when Milton Friedman was at his best. His competence, character, intellectual rigor, quick wit always made us feel like we had the right guy on our side.
The reason we set up the foundation was in the hope that it would educate the public at large about the importance of this issue. A full exercise of choice would invigorate the public school system, would improve it. Why? Competition always has that effect.
I think families knew it in their own gut, but there was no common knowledge, as it were, of what's happened to schools.
And he insisted that the future had to do with education and that we would not survive unless we could educate all of our children. And I think that was a magnificent, spectacularly important point that he made.
There has to be a constant effort to change the organizational model of education, to make it more dynamic, to make it more market-oriented, to provide more choices. You can have a single standard and you can have a single expectation which is significantly higher, but how you achieve that should be done outside of monopoly. But there should be many choices, more charter schools, more voucher programs, expanding the existing voucher programs.
Friedman said, no, if you give out vouchers and let the children go to whatever school is the best school available to them, then the teacher's monopoly on education will be broken.
I think Milton Friedman would probably say, good work, nice start, a lot more to do.
The great achievements of civilization have not come from government buildings. Einstein didn't construct his theory under orders from a bureaucrat. Henry Ford didn't revolutionize the automobile industry that way. In the only cases in which the masses have escaped from the kind of grinding poverty you're talking about, the only cases in recorded history are where they have had capitalism and largely free trade. You know, I think you're taking a lot of things for granted. And just tell me, where in the world you find these angels who are going to organize society for us? Well, I don't even trust you to do that.
Around the nature of government. I hadn't thought about that. He helped me a lot. I used to be a family liberal. Now I'm a liberal. And I kind of, I flicker on this issue. I don't flame, I just spark a little.
He wrote an article about school choice 50 years ago. Now, it's just starting to happen.
What you should do is to have a voucher equal to about 50% of what government is spending. That would save the taxpayers money. It would be a high enough sum but to produce at least a better quality of story.
Well, the last thing I'd want to do, because I'm afraid Dr. Freidman is watching me, is to tell you the competition is not a good thing.
There's no doubt that a major reform of the educational system would benefit low-income people in this country more than any other reform you can think of.
The color of their skin, the level of income of their family, whether they were born here or born in some far-off land was irrelevant. But God gave everybody the ability to learn. It was up to us to organize around them to assure that they did.
Milton Friedman understood that behind all the arguments against free markets and individual liberty was a lack of belief in freedom itself. We celebrate our belief in freedom and to honor the legacy of a man whose work and life epitomizes a dedication to individual liberty, free markets, and school choice. We can remember his legacy, and strengthen his legacy, knowing that his work will always be with us as we engage in the constant struggle for freedom.
I really wish Milton was back with us. Dr. Freidman, sir, Dr. Freidman, what should we do? What should we do?
You know, you say to yourself, oh, such and such is a genius, blah, blah, he's a genius. Friedman really was a genius, but also with the heart of a patriot and the heart of a warrior.
We're now in the middle of this great debate. What is our future here?
This would be a different country and not as great a country as Milton Friedman never lived.
Freedman Foundation is playing a key role in reforms for expanding voucher programs in states and bringing about greater school choice and better learning because of competition.
These problems are hardly resolved. But what is definitely true today, and I think becomes more and more apparent as the years go by, is that Milton Friedman was out there speaking to one of the most important issues of our century.
All right, thanks, Jim, for getting that video. I want to, before we introduce our first speaker, there are some sign-up sheets on the table. If you wouldn't mind signing in, we'd love to know that you are here. Also, if you get bored, there's the bar exam right next door, several doors down. Feel free to jump right in there, and I'm sure they'll be happy to take it from a group of very friendly people, those lawyers. Sorry, Ryan. I want to introduce to you our first speaker, Dr. Milton Wolfe. He had a very unique position in really the fight against the implementation of Obamacare. You saw him on Fox and Friends. Hannity still contributes to the Washington Times, David Collar, and some other things. But he has a very unique position in that he is President Obama's closest cousin, if I remember right. So closest cousin. So it's a very unique position, but a very unashamed, unabashed, conservative cousin of the president. So with that, I want to introduce to you Dr. Milton Wolfe. He's a board-certified radiologist in the Kansas City area, and a friend, and has been for a few years. So would like to welcome you here.
Thank you, Jeff. I appreciate you guys having me, and I've always been a big fan of AFP. In fact, one of my when I was early getting out there, early in my days of going public, was speaking. It was right here at this facility. Even I think it was with Michelle Malkin and PJ O'Rourke. Yeah. I'll tell you, it really is exciting to me to be able to talk about the free market. If something really motivates me, it really is the free market. There are a few books you read in your life. There are very few things in your life that will really change you. The books you read and the people you meet. And Milton Friedman's book is one that really changes your lives when you read it. The first time I read Free to Choose, I think I had probably the same thoughts that you had. What kind of parents would name their kid Milton? Really, that's no way to go through life. Milton is the kid who sits in the back of the class and eats paste. But But I read that book, and it's so eye-opening. And in fact, it was so eye-opening the first time I read it, and then, I don't know, 15 years later when I read it again, and I thought to myself, why are we not listening to some of these things? You know, I look around the country, and I see the direction our country's going. I look at both of our parties, and if history's any guide, we can see there's no question how powerful the free market is. The free market is the most powerful engine of prosperity in the history of humankind. There's no mistaking that. I can't say anything better than Dr. Freidman said himself, that there's never been a people who have risen out of abject poverty without a good share of the free market. And what the free market is simply freedom. The free market is free people, free to exchange their goods and services, their labor and their capital. It's very simple. It's nothing more and it's nothing less. And the thing that gets me the most, when I see people talking about the free market and I see people talking about prosperity, we all talk a good game. I'm not here to single out any party or person necessarily, but the reality is we have one of our political parties who is adamantly opposed to the free market. No, the Democrats, when it comes to taxes, when it comes to spending, when it comes to regulation, the Democrats are like high school boys on prom night. No matter what argument they're making, we know exactly what they want. But it's not the Democrats. The Democrats, we're not going to change them. We're going to have to defeat them, but we're not going to defeat them if we act like them, if we're seduced by them, if we're intimidated by them. And so, I've been a Republican all my life, but not always a proud Republican. Because it's my party that's supposed to stand up for the free market. It's my party that's supposed to stand up for the Constitution. It's my party that's supposed to stand for low taxes, low regulation, low spending. And it's my party that has failed. It's my party that has broken faith with the American idea and with the free market. And that's what I can't stand. Let me pick on one person. And it's somebody I admire dearly. And in fact, till I take my last breath on this earth, I will be in appreciation that this person was where he was when he was. And that's our former President, George W. Bush. I will be eternally grateful for the way he protected our country. But I can't get past the fact that he didn't believe in your freedom, and he didn't believe in my freedom. He didn't believe in the free market. He talked about the free market, but at one point he said he's going to abandon free market principles so he can protect the free market. Now try to wrap your head around that kind of logic. Now this is a man who didn't trust you to choose your own light bulbs. This is a man that banned the light bulb, and he says he believed in the free market. Now that's not how a Republican should be. That's not how somebody who champions the free market should be. There's a lot of talk now in our country, or within the party. Is there going to be a third party? Is this Tea Party movement rising? Is this Liberty movement rising? Is the establishment going to hold on in charge? I'll tell you something. I have a message for the GOP. If they want to avoid a disastrous third party, then they should stop being a disastrous surrender party.
Yeah!
When we look at the free market, we look at it in multiple different areas. And one, of course, that I look at is healthcare. As a doctor, as a physician, I obviously care about that, but everybody does. All of us are patients sooner or later. And, we're in the early days of the reckoning when it comes to Obamacare. And I wish that I could just simply blame all of that on another party and say it's somebody else's fault. But that's not the truth. The truth is, the road to Obamacare was paved by my party, was paved by Republicans. And I'm not just talking about Romney Care in Massachusetts that laid out the groundwork. How about what our blessed president did? How about the largest expansion in the history of Medicare? That was our party. We can't blame that on another party. And anyone who voted for that, they paved the road to Obamacare. What we did is we did this massive expansion so we can provide prescriptions for our senior citizens. A few years before that, a private company, this little company out of Bentonville, Arkansas, they figured a way to get the top 300 medicines in the country down to $4 a month. And since then, they've gotten the price even lower, $10 every 3 months, I think it is. It might even be lower than that. And when they did that, Target had to respond, and all the other pharmacies had to respond. The liberals came out and said, there is no way you can provide prescription benefits without big government. That was 5 years after Walmart had already done it. But that was our party. We failed. We failed. And I'll tell you something else. If we're really going to take an honest look at where we are, let's look right now at Obamacare. You can say you're against Obamacare, or you can really fight against Obamacare. This is the most destructive law of our lifetimes.
Yes.
And now we have some brave senators right now, Ted Cruz's and Rand Paul's and Mike Lee's, who are fighting this thing and saying, you know what, if this is really as destructive as we've been saying it is, then how dare we pass any kind of budget that has any spending for it? So you have a choice. We're not saying we should shut down the government. We're saying you can fund the government with Obamacare or you can fund the government without Obamacare. It's your choice.
Amen.
Now, unfortunately, a lot of people in our party are opposed to that. I don't think you can say you're against Obamacare if you're in favor of funding Obamacare. Let me tell you one more. Any Kathleen Sebelius supporters here today? Gosh, I mean, even Charles Manson has some groupies. I wish I could blame all of Obamacare on that other party. But in truth, our senators right here in Kansas, our senators publicly endorsed and voted for the Queen of Obamacare.
Yeah.
Now, I have a message for both of them. You cannot say you're against Obamacare when you're crowning the Queen of Obamacare.
Amen.
So it's our party that's going to have to stand up for this, but we're going to have to take an honest look in the mirror and see who we are. Are we seduced and intimidated by this other party into going along with them? I mean, the other party is ready to run this country off the cliff, and we're ready to compromise with them and say we'll walk off the cliff instead. You know, these politicians in Washington, they do it all the time. They always talk about how great bipartisanship is and how great it is that we need to reach a hand across the aisle and we need to compromise. We just need to compromise. Well, the way they compromise in Washington is this. The Democrats say they want to spend $100 billion on some program, and the Republicans come along and say, well, we just want to spend $50 billion on some program.
Yeah.
And then they compromise and instead they spend $150 billion on the program.
Yeah.
We know what kind of reforms work. Milton Friedman talked about some of these kinds of reforms. You know, when it comes to health care, it really is straightforward. It really is, and it's proven. Where we've tried it, it works. It's like Novocaine. Give it a chance and it'll work. Tax reform. Tax reform that makes it equitable, makes it fair, and the same rules whether you buy your own insurance yourself or whether you want to buy it through your company. That way your insurance is portable, your insurance follows you instead of your boss. Reciprocity across state lines. Allow one state to accept the insurance or accept the licensing of another state, because states, and we love to blame Washington for everything, but states are driving up the cost of health care by creating these artificial monopolies. And some of them, hey, I'm a beneficiary of the licensing one. I don't have to have any competition from any other doctor in the other 49 states. Thank you. But you know what? That's not good for my patients. You want to serve my patients? You make me compete against every other doctor in the country to serve you. You make the insurance companies compete against all the other insurance companies in the country to serve you. That would benefit you. Third is frivolous lawsuit reform. We have got to get these lawyers, these ambulance-chasing lawyers, out of your exam room. I mean, that recipe right there for healthcare reform works. Where we try free market medicine, it works. LASIK eye surgery. I bet you some people in this room have had LASIK eye surgery. When that first came out, it cost $10,000. The procedure was moderately okay. Today, it's less than $1,000. The doctors who are providing it are happy. The patients who are receiving it are happy. And the costs have come down. The quality's gone up. This can happen all across healthcare everywhere. But we've gone exactly the wrong direction. But it's not just healthcare. I'm a doctor and I love talking about healthcare, but even I get bored of listening to talks about healthcare. Let's talk about the growth of government. Let's talk about taxes and spending. Right now, the government devours 25% of our economy. That's the federal government alone. That's unconscionable. Now, Republicans, my party, loves to talk a good game. We're for lower taxes and we're for lower spending. And yet we have a $17 trillion bipartisan debt.
Yeah.
If you want to know what bipartisanship looks like, you look at that $17 trillion debt. Now, the other party, they love to talk about fair. We want fair. Everyone should pay their fair share. And sadly, my party is either incapable or unwilling to engage that argument. I don't think they get it. So next time someone says, oh, the rich should pay their fair share, Since the Republicans in Washington don't know how to respond to that, allow me to show them how. The response is fair. You want fair? I don't think you know what that word means, fair. I don't think it's fair that a multimillionaire president pays a lower tax rate than Warren Buffett's secretary. I don't think it's fair that former Treasury Secretary Timothy Geithner, who takes all of our taxes, didn't pay his own taxes and he blames it on TurboTax. I don't think it's fair that federal government employees have $3.5 billion in back delinquent taxes. I don't think that's fair. So before we raise one dime of taxes on any American citizen, let's make those cronies and those insiders pay their fair share.
Yeah, hear, hear.
But if we're going to make everyone pay their fair share, how about we make everyone work their fair share? How's that for a concept? You know, you want to earn what I earn? It is yours for the taking. You just come work like I work. You don't want to mow lawns, milk cows, sack groceries. Let's see, what else? What other humbling jobs have I done? What's that?
Put up hay.
Baled a lot of hay. You don't want to do those? I'm so sorry. I didn't want to do them either, but nobody would do them for me.
Right.
Yeah.
So, but that's not the way in Washington. That's not the way our party operates. Look at the latest tax hike in Congress. $600 billion tax hike. They call it the fiscal cliff. The fiscal cliff tax hike passed those midnight votes. Passed with about 3 minutes after the time they printed the thing, so no one read it. And they raised taxes from one day to the next by $600 billion. 80% of Kansas families saw an increase in their taxes. And that's a shame. That's a real shame. But what's even worse is that our senator, our senior senator, upon voting for that without having read it, thanked himself, patted himself on the back for providing tax relief. And that's his phrase, tax relief. He called a $600 billion tax increase tax relief. And you want my opinion? My opinion is something goes terribly wrong with the human brain when it's been in Washington for too long. Up becomes down, wrong becomes right, and a $600 billion tax increase becomes tax relief. But that's not even the worst of it. The worst of it was after thanking himself for cutting your taxes when he just raised them, he said, now we can finally focus on spending. Well, if he bothered to read the bill he just voted for, it included $300 million of increased spending. You know, excuse my cans in here, but don't pee on the floor and blame it on the dog.
Yeah.
You know, I'm sorry. Carrie said, don't use that one. But she didn't come today, so I thought I'm going for it anyway. You know, asking Washington to focus on spending is like asking Lindsay Lohan to focus on sobriety.
Yeah.
It just doesn't work. You want my medical opinion? As we say in surgery, hot lights and cold steel. Cut it out.
Yeah.
Every one of them must go.
Absolutely.
But the real problem we're looking at is not just healthcare policy or taxes or spending. That's not really it. If we don't get the right diagnosis, we'll never make a cure. You know, there's a reason why career politicians want you to believe a $600 billion tax increase is tax relief. There's a reason why career politicians built up a $17 trillion debt and $200 trillion in unfunded social spending. There's a reason why these politicians spend like there's no tomorrow. It's because they've given up on tomorrow. So if we're going to diagnose this correctly, then we're going to have to really look at what their motivation is. You know, when you spend trillions of dollars yet to be earned by a generation yet to come of age or yet even to be born, that's not a spending crisis. That's a moral crisis. That is giving up on our future. That's giving up on our kids. And we can do much better than that, can't we? We can do much better than that. Now, we can accept what they keep telling us. They can tell us these tax hikes or tax relief, and we can believe them. And our $17 trillion debt will turn into a $20 trillion debt. We can believe them when they say they're going to focus on spending. Just give them one more chance. Just give them one more chance. And our $20 trillion debt will be $25 trillion debt. The government, instead of devouring 25% of our country, will devour 50% of our country. the benefits, the opportunities that you and I had will not be available to our kids. But I think we can do better. I think we can do much better. I think, in fact, that passing of the torch is upon us. I think you and I will leave our footprints in the sands of time, and we will make the changes that this previous generation refused to. They were seduced and intimidated, and they refused to, and this won't be easy. I don't pretend it will. And you may not feel that you're ready to get into that fight, but I'm telling you, you're ready. The passing of that torch is upon us. I'll leave you with this. This is a different passing of the torch of a different time. I was younger than I am now. I was in medical school. I was doing the obstetrics rotation, and I was going to check on a patient of mine, and this patient was going rapidly into delivery, called precipitous delivery. It was, she was going to have her baby right then, and I was all she had, because the attending physicians, there were a couple different cesarean sections going on at the time, the residents were with them, and the nurse and I are in there, and I realized, I do a check-in, and I realized she's about to have her baby, so I start to go out of the room, and the nurse says, "Where are you going?" I said, "I'm going to get the doctor," and she says, "You are the doctor." I said, "Okay." I come back in, she's helping me to gown up, and I'm thinking, I've read about this, I've seen a few of these, I think I can do it. I got my back to the patient, and she's gowning me up, and I'm nervous, you know. And the sounds coming out of this woman are something most people have never heard in their lives. I'm telling you, gentlemen, if you've never been in a room with a laboring woman, be afraid. Be very afraid. And between these growls and groans and cries, she kind of screams out, "I sure hope you've done this before." And I'll tell you something, in medicine, patients will never ask you if you've ever done a procedure before, except for the time you're about to do it for the first time. And I thought to myself, I can't lie to her. But at the same time, I can't introduce panic into this situation that could only be to the detriment of her and to her baby. So I calmed myself, I took a deep breath, slowed my breathing, I started talking in a real deep and deliberate voice, and I turned around, I turned to her and I said, "Don't you worry, you'll be just fine." And I turned back to the nurse, and I'm sure that look of panic must have just fallen on my face. And she's still gowning me up, and she leans into me and she whispers something in my ear I will never forget. She says, "Don't you worry, you'll be just fine too." I'm here today to tell you that if you'll take this stand for liberty, if you will step out of your comfort zone, if you dare to take a stand and change this country, I have every confidence in the world that we can rebuild that shining city on a hill. I have every confidence in the world that the eagle will soar again. And I promise you this, you'll be just fine too. Thank you. Thank you very much for having me.
All right, next I want to introduce to you a man who is a new hero of mine. His name is Joel McClure. Joel, if you want to come up here, hails from Deerfield, Kansas at the moment, getting ready to move to Denver, Colorado, to seminary to pursue priesthood. But he was the leader in the fight here recently against the NEA, the decertification process, the NEA in Deerfield, Kansas. My understanding this morning, there are 3 other school districts across the state that are also pursuing this. But it's something that hasn't been done enough. And from the bottom of my heart, thank you for standing up. I know that's not an easy thing as a teacher. You've been a teacher for a while now. Just greatly appreciate that you standing up for freedom like that. So.
Thank you very much. Good morning. Thank you, Jeff, for your great introduction. It's just an honor to be here with you this morning as we honor the legacy of a great American, Milton Friedman. Specifically, very grateful to Americans for Prosperity, not only for the work that you do for liberty here in Kansas, but specifically to have me address this great crowd today about what we did in Deerfield, Kansas. On June 7th, 2013, approximately 1:45 p.m., Deerfield School District number 216 successfully decertified the National Education Association and the Kansas National Education Association. So now instead of union control, my colleagues and I chose to create a local-only organization where instead of a handful of union members calling the shots, every teacher who is employed in the district now has full rights and responsibilities in the governing of their school. And to my knowledge, we are only the second school district in Kansas to have done so, the first being Riley County School District in 2009. So why did we do this? In 2012, there were only 5 out of 27 teachers in Deerfield who were members of the union. As a matter of fact, during my years, there had never been more than 10 teachers in the union in Deerfield. So union members were always in the minority for many years. And some of us started to think, what if next year it's 4 members? What if 3? What if one year there's only 1 member in the union? Because of the Unified Dues Structures Acts passed in the 1970s, if teachers wanted to participate in the local governing of their school, join the local, it means they also had to join the state and the national teachers' unions. And in Kansas, that costs each teacher about $600 to participate in the local school governing. And the outrageous expense of union membership was one reason why many of the teachers in Deerfield never belonged to the local. And another reason was many teachers did not want to support the lobbying work that NEA is involved with when teachers didn't want to see their money going to political candidates with whom they absolutely and ideologically agreed. So with many teachers locked out of the local, participation in their school, it's very easy for power and control to be concentrated into the hands of a few. And to many of us, this was no longer acceptable. But did we in fact have a choice? That's when I called Gary Siegel, the executive director of Kansas Association of American Educators, or the Kansas AAE. I had no knowledge of any alternatives to the Kansas National Education Association, the KNEA. And I found out that the Kansas AAE, a non-union professional teachers association, offered much better incentives than KNEA at a significant financial savings. I was sold. In the course of our discussion, I also started talking to him about the problems that we had been having with some of our colleagues who were union members. Problems that included closed-door, secret meetings, negative attitudes toward administration and Board of Education members, hostility toward teachers like myself who advocated for better communication between teachers and administrators, greater teacher involvement, reform ideas, and community outreach. Gary had shared with me similar struggles that he had faced when he was a teacher at Riley County Schools. Well, it turns out that in the course of our conversation, Gary was the teacher who led the decertification efforts in Riley County in 2009. And so this is where I learned that teachers, in fact, did have a choice. Gary shared with me the path that Riley County took to decertify the union. He gave me copies of documents, petitions, contacts at the Kansas Department of Labor, as well as even the lawyer who represented them during their decertification efforts. And Gary and I became inseparable. And I want to introduce to you Gary Siegel, who's with me this morning. In fact, Gary, if you would. I had the petition signed by 15 teachers before the first day of in-service in August of 2012. I had to then determine when to file the petition, and this is the point of the story where I tell you of all the challenges that we faced. Riley County filed their petition in late November of 2008, and Gary had shared with me that late November was close to the filing deadline. At the same time, I didn't want to file too early and risk the petition being rejected. So I made numerous telephone calls and sent numerous emails to the Kansas Department of Labor here in Topeka, trying to find this deadline for filing. Nobody would tell me. Someone keeps saying, and this is in September, you can go ahead and file now, you're well within the limits. Well, skeptically, I waited, I call again, find out the precise Kansas statute for filing. And this time it was, the window to file was between 90 and 150 days of the current negotiated agreement expiring. Well, by that calculation, the window to file didn't even open until February 1st of 2013. So all we got was conflicting information right out of the gate in this process. So I ended up filing the petition by gut instinct the third week of November. The protocol then for the Department of Labor is to notify, in this case, KNEA, in which they had 20 days to respond. Through the whole month of December, I heard nothing from the Department of Labor, despite my emails and unreturned phone calls. I heard nothing from the Department of Labor until I tried again January 10th. Finally got a hold of the Director of Labor Relations at the Department of Labor, and I asked him where the petition had been. He said he couldn't find it, and he asked me to fax a copy to his office. So I did, and he then forwarded on to David Shawner, who is the Chief Legal Counsel for KNEA here in Topeka. This is where the fun really begins. Mr. Shawner challenged the petition in a number of ways. First, he tried to show that I didn't have the minimum of 30% of signatures on the petition, when in fact I had 52% because I had 15 out of 27 signatures. Next, because Mr. Shawner received the petition around the 10th of January via fax, he assumed that I didn't file it before December 1st, which was that elusive deadline that I had been trying to find from the Department of Labor. And then he tried to have our lawyer rejected because she was not licensed to practice law in the state of Kansas, as well as many other objections to our petition. The Director of Labor Relations, Douglas Hager, had set the time then for a conference call between all parties on March 11th. And the call occurred, and Mr. Hager said that he would rule on the petition whether it could go forward or not within 10 days of that phone call. Which means we should have a ruling somewhere around the 20th of March. Well, the 20th of March came and went, no word. In fact, almost a month had passed with nothing from the Department of Labor until around the second week of April. And it turns out that Mr. Hager had suffered severe medical problems and never handed our case off to anybody else in the office. It just sat on his desk. So again, one setback after another, and this is well into 5 months after filing. To make a very long story much shorter, legal counsel for KNEA lost on every single objection. I did prove more than 30% signatures on the petition. Our lawyer, who successfully represented Riley County Schools in 2009, was allowed to represent schools in Kansas and still is, according to Kansas state statutes. And I don't know how they did it, but the Department of Labor found my original petition that was date stamped November 27th, 2012, just 4 days before the deadline. They found it. Well, as you can imagine, the months of silence that we had to endure in Deerfield prompted me to take our case to the media because we did not know why this petition was taking so long. We could never get any answers. So I sent out a press release to all the newspapers in Kansas, and papers like Garden City Telegram and Wichita Eagle eagerly picked up on the story. And they stayed in touch with us to find out the results of the vote, because even though the petition was ruled to go forward, the teachers in Deerfield still had to vote whether to keep KNEA or to decertify. So we finally had our vote on May 14th of 2013. That's almost half a year since I had filed that petition. The result of the vote, the first time, was a 13-13 tie. KNEA was able to scare and intimidate some of our teachers, even teachers who had originally signed that petition back in August, to turn against us. But a tie did mean that there would be a runoff election. And the votes for the runoff election were tallied and counted on June 7th, and we won 11-10. That's with 3 ballots for us that were rejected, 2 because of resignations and 1 because the teacher had not sent it in time. So we would have won by a larger margin, even had all those been counted. After we successfully decertified the union, we took it to the papers. And it so happens that national bloggers picked up on our story, 2 of which were James Shirk at the Foundry from the Heritage Foundation, and the national headquarters of the Association of American Educators also picked up on that. And from there, watchdog groups, education, reform, reporters and outlets, and others picked up on the story. You can read them, just Google Deerfield, Kansas teacher, and they'll be right there. As you can imagine, KNEA is not too happy with the outcome. And when reporters ran the story, they did call to get KNEA's perspective, and I want to read for you a quote from KNEA's Southwest Uniserve Director, Pamela Torgerson, because her words are absolutely spot on with the culture of big government, progressive philosophies that do not think you and I can be trusted with freedom. This is what she says. My concern with that, being the decertification, is that without any kind of organizational backing, it's going to be hard for the teachers there to enforce their negotiated agreement. So if they get into trouble during bargaining, they'll have to go to mediation on their own. And if things work out even worse and they decide to go to fact-finding, they are pretty much on their own. They would have to pay for the fact-finder to come out, so they could be in a vulnerable position. In other words, her concerns arise from a progressive mentality that wants you and I to believe that we cannot make it on our own, that we need the union as teachers, that we can't survive without them. And likewise, that argument is the same from progressives everywhere today who think that we cannot function or prosper without big government control. It's the same. And there are many teachers across the state of Kansas who would definitely like to disagree with that. I know there's many people in this room who disagree with that, and I certainly know that Milton Friedman would absolutely disagree with that. I believe that we have set a trend across this state that will spread far and wide. And when teachers know that they do have a choice and when they understand the things that they have to go through, and I think everything that we experienced going through this process is the absolute worst case scenario. I do not think other teachers would even see that. I think it all happened to us. And so we have established a very good roadmap for other schools and other teachers to follow. Avoid the things that we didn't do well, do the things that we did well, and they should be very, very successful. I want to close with you with just one quote from Milton Friedman that very closely articulates the movement that we have begun here in Kansas, and I know other schools around the nation, very few of them, but they have started this as well. When asked about school choice in an article for the Washington Post on February 19th, 1995, Milton Friedman says this: I sense that we are on the verge of a breakthrough in one state or another, which will then sweep like wildfire through the rest of the country as it demonstrates its effectiveness. So thank you very much for your time. Thank you for giving me.
All right, and finally, would like to introduce to you a very dear friend of mine and has been for the last 10 years. I think this will be her 10th session as a representative in the Kansas House. Representative Cassia Kelly from Mark City currently serves as the House Education Chair and does a remarkable job fighting a fight that many over the years have quite frankly avoided. And taking on the NEA and taking on the issues of school choice and looking at the Common Core issue. I'm sure many of you have heard about it over the past few months. But greatly appreciate the work that you do and the fight that you fight in Topeka, and encourage you to keep going on and keep doing what you're doing. We're behind you. So.
And I want to say that wouldn't be possible to do without people like you, Jeff Glendenning, who have stood behind me all of the way. Because as you well know, not a lot of people appreciate in the Capitol what we do when it comes to things like this. John McClure, they said you didn't exist. Teachers like you don't exist. That's what they tell us. Gary Siegel, you don't exist. I know you do because you came before my committee. But you don't exist. Not when you ask them. Because everybody walks in lockstep, right? We all think the same things, and we all think that we should be told what to do, just as you said. Listening today has been, first of all, it's wonderful to be here. And I have to say there are quite a few people in the room that I owe a great deal of gratitude to, and I want to recognize some of you here in just a little bit. But I do want to talk about education, and normally My time in the legislature has been really focused on budget and taxes. Randy, didn't see you earlier. And in maybe the infinite or not infinite wisdom of the speaker and his then brilliant chief of staff, Christy Kriegshauser, I was given the post of the education chair. And what a job, let me tell you, what a job. The education community, unfortunately, is a very difficult community to break into. And I think it's one that in large part parents are quite intimidated by. And there's a good reason for that. Because in a lot of educational settings these days, you're told as a parent, you don't know what's best for your child. We know what's best for your child. You're not welcome to enter your thoughts about your child's education into our model. Our model is what exists, and that's what we're going to go by. And that is a tragedy. We can talk about taxes all day long, we can talk about budget all day long, we can talk about all of these other things that are important to all of us all day long. But at the end of the day, if we don't realize the values that our children are being educated with, and the ideas that they're being taught in their schools, then we don't realize where the battle begins. Bad ideas will always produce bad behavior. Bad ideas will always produce bad behavior. And so I do want to touch a little bit on school choice, and I want to talk about Common Core too, and I want to acknowledge that in this room there are others who know a lot more about the issue than I do, who have been plugging away while we have a business, and when I'm out of session I've kind of got to focus on our business. But there are others who have stayed in there in the fight. Megan, I see you in the audience. Major kingpin in this fight against Common Core. Can't say enough about you and your counterpart, Kristen. Phyllis, you've been involved. I'm just going to kind of go around people. Shanti, yes, Phyllis. Dr. and Representative Shanti Gandhi, who sits on our education committee. Jack, you've come up and spoken, of course, at the State Board of Education along with others. And by the way, we all need to be at the State Board of Education. If you've never attended a State Board of Education meeting, what an eye-opener. When you have to discuss for 25 minutes, and I know I'm being recorded, I'm going to say it anyway, when you have to discuss for 25 minutes what you're going to do for taking a lunch break, something is terribly wrong. Terribly wrong. When you also have to discuss if the number of citizens who are up there to speak to an issue is worth carrying on the open dialogue time, when you have to discuss whether or not those people who travel across the state get the chance to speak, something is terribly wrong. And I want each one of you to remember this next election cycle, those people who sit on the State Board of Education, because they don't care a lot of, not all of them, but some of them didn't care about what you had to say about Common Core. Jim could not overlook you in this fight. You were up here quite a bit. I know I'm going to look somebody over, and I'm sorry. And I got to say, Christy Kriegshauser went to the mat for us this year. She went to the mat for us to allow us to get a vote on Common Core. And that vote was important. Because when we come up for elections this next year, and in fact I want to talk about other bills that we had in the Education Committee, but when we come up for election next year, I want you to look at how representatives voted. Milton, going back to your comment, we talk a good talk, don't we? Boy, we talk a good talk. There are very few who will walk that walk. After 10 years in the Kansas legislature, when push comes to shove and the heat gets really hot in the kitchen, there may be 6 or 7 people standing beside me, and that's pathetic.
Yeah.
We need to look at who we send up to Topeka. We need to understand what they say, whether they're sitting on the state board, whether they're our representative, whether they're our senator, if what they say matches how they vote. And folks, it's not that difficult. What it does take is you to show up. It does take for you to listen on the internet. It does take for you to tell your friends. It does take you to follow what Kristen and Megan are doing with the groups that are meeting around Kansas, and finding 5 friends, 1 friend, take 1 friend who may take another friend. You know, you've got to find people who will get involved. And I know we're all busy. I understand. I have a 5-year-old. I have a business. I serve in the legislature, and sometimes I get my laundry done. I understand. But we have to do it. If we don't, no one will. And that is, no, excuse me. If we don't, they will.
Yeah, that's right.
And they are. And we must, because we are so close to losing so much. Dave Depew, if I did not recognize you, I would absolutely be so remiss. Dave has been such a support to me this year in the Education Committee, and when I heard him low, Dave has been there. So what is Common Core, and what's good about it, and what's bad about it? If you can listen to both sides of the issue, and really, when you listen to it, it sounds pretty good. I have a son. If I move from Kansas to California and he's on, I don't know, wherever he is on his math course, we move to California, which is never going to happen, but if we did, would I as a parent want him to retread old formulas that he's gone through? No, probably I wouldn't. He'd sit there and be bored. He's actually quite a bright child. Or would I want there to be a big gap in his learning? No, I wouldn't. I wouldn't want him to have to play catch up. The argument is that if we go to this Common Core, no matter where your children are, they can learn the same thing. Now, there can be some arguments made that sound pretty good for that, but I don't know many children that are exactly alike. And I don't know many children who learn in the exact pace, in the exact manner, and have the same interests. Some do. But most of our children don't. Most of our children are gifted with a God-given, innate ability to do something well. Whether they have all of their physical abilities about them or not. I have a cousin who is severely mentally handicapped. He is a janitor for a living, and he's very happy because he has a place where he is important, and it matters. What we are doing in education is saying that every child is cut from the same mold, and that every child needs to learn the same thing at the same pace, regardless of whether you're really good at ag-related things or aerospace engineering, or maybe you're an excellent welder. And we have this mentality in America that if you don't go to a 4-year institution after you graduate high school, that somehow you're a lesser person. And that's not true. That is not true. Many people, in fact, we just sold several properties off of our business, and the fellow that we're selling them to never graduated high school, and he had a reason that he never graduated high school, but he now owns a thriving business. And he was telling my brother he said, well, he hung his head and he said, I had to quit high school, and he had a good reason that he had to quit. And my brother just came back and said, looks like it didn't hurt you much. Now, I'm not advocating for dropping out of high school, but that is to say that there is a person who did not need to go to a 4-year institution. He's an electrician, he's an excellent electrician, and he has a very successful business. And he just bought a nice property so he could expand. And we have this mentality that we need to shove every child into the same little peg and make them do the same thing at the same time. That's good for boxcars on a train, because obviously if the wheels were in different places and they were different sizes, we'd have trouble running the trains down the track. But you can't do that with children. You can't. There are so many facets to the Common Core that we don't even have time to talk about today, and I would urge you to get with any one of the people that I mentioned. I would absolutely urge you, and to be involved, because Kansas has wholeheartedly embraced the Common Core. And this year...
Not entirely.
Well, not all of us. Not all of us. We're still fighting. That's true. Let me restate that. The Kansas Board of Education has wholeheartedly embraced it, and we have
not
a lot
entirely.
Okay, that's true. The majority. The majority. Pardon me. You are correct. The majority. But we still have an opportunity to do something. And if you followed Common Core much, you'll hear a lot of people call it Obama Core. And there's a reason they call it Obamacare. And while many things, much like government is involved in, start off innocently looking and like they're actually going to be a good thing, it opens the door for some very onerous things to happen. Right now, if you have a national standard, which is what they're in the process of creating, you could probably argue, oh, a national standard's okay. But a national standard will eventually end up as a national curriculum. And when you have a national curriculum, you can drive your thoughts from the top down exactly as you want them to be.
Amen.
And when you don't allow parents into the process, and you have a captive audience with your children, which, by the way, I would say if you have children or grandchildren, take a look at the school they're in. Take a look at whether or not you're able to come in and visit with the teacher. We have some great teachers in our system, but a lot of them are very, very intimidated, either through K&EA channels or by other administrative channels. They're very intimidated, and they are afraid to stand up. But we need to back our teachers and empower them to stand up. They are the most important person in the classroom, and the parents are the other most important person in that equation. And if either one of those entities are scared off of what it is that we're trying to do to educate our children to the best of their abilities, then you have really lost the system, and that's about where we are. We haven't gotten into the testing. There's issues with the national testing that's coming forward. Kansas is looking at that. There are all kinds of cost issues tied to that. You'll hear that it's not going to cost very much, but the fact of the matter is nobody really knows. When you look at them all being online tests and what type of bandwidth you're going to have in different aspects of it, it's going to be expensive. It's a taxpayer issue apart from the fact that it's a child issue as well. I also want to talk about children in another way. When we talk about the Common Core and we talk about, I think it's appropriately named common. Yeah. It's very common. Yeah. And I don't know that they thought about that when they went to name it Common Core, but it is very common. And I know a teacher in our area who quit this year. She said, I can't do it. I can't teach the Common Core because I'm trying to take my good learners, my really quick picker-uppers, and I'm trying to take my kids that are slow, and I'm trying to pull everybody to the middle and get them all on that same common track. And I've heard this from several teachers. They're afraid to say it in their schools, but they will tell you. She has quit education. She's moved to Michigan, back home, and has moved in with her family. She said, I can't take it anymore. I didn't get into education to do this. And I don't believe a lot of our teachers got into education to do this. We think Common Core is a great thing because we're coming off of NCLB, but at what point are parents going to say, federal government, you do not belong in our business, you do not belong in our children's business, you have no constitutional right to be in our children's business, and we're not going to stand for it.
That's right.
We had a somewhat successful year in education this year, and I say that because we actually got some bills passed, which is near miracle status. Equal access, Gary, we got equal access passed this year, and I want to say, John, you're not the only one out there that didn't know there were other things available, because you're one of the few industries where we say the rest of the world, all the other business people and professionals get all of this information, but you get the NEA's information. Nothing outside of that. And they'll argue, oh, the first day everybody can come in, there's a fair and you can see everything. But after they sign that contract, the NEA is the only one. You need supplies or different insurance or anything like that, NEA is your guy. No, no, no. This is the free market. This is America still. And you do have access to other entities and opportunities, as you found out. And we were able to pass equal access this year, and I think that was huge. Innovative districts. Innovative districts is something that we've heard a little bit from the State Board of Education on. Not entirely happy with our innovative districts model. So that'll be, I'm sure, continue to be talked about moving forward. But we understand, the chair of the Senate Education Committee, Jeff, you're going to have to just bring a hook, okay? Truly, you're going to have to go like that. the Senate Chair of Education and I both believe that every child is gifted with their own God-given abilities, and that every child deserves a good education. We heard Milton Friedman say that, and it is possible. And there are children in our system who are discounted and set aside. Some of them are in poverty, some of them struggle from mental or physical issues, and if you pull some of those educators aside, they will tell you, yes, there are those who fall through the cracks, it's true. But it's kind of like, but hey, we're educating most kids. Well, that's not good enough. That is not good enough, because every child should have an opportunity to learn in the way that they need to learn. And we attempted a lot of school choice opportunities this year. I think I've heard every argument in the book now for why a child should not be able to be educated in the facility that best educates them. And not one of those arguments was child-centered. Not one of them. I want you to understand that there are a number of legislators, and I don't even have to say Republican or Democrat because it's across the spectrum, that put buildings and associations and contributions above children and parents and teachers.
Yep, exactly.
They put buildings and associations and contributions above parents and children and teachers. But they'll come back and tell you that we're for the kids. If you're for the kids, then you vote for the kids. We had a couple of great bills this year that broke my heart that they didn't go anywhere. Namely, corporate scholarships for low-income and special needs children. How on earth can you argue with that? And by the way, in other states, it is the party that I don't belong to that's running the line for that they're really trying to get it going. It's a nonpartisan issue when you're focused on the children. When you're focused on anything besides the children, that's when it becomes party politics, and that's when it becomes about the contributions. But when you're focused on the children, you don't have to think about, oh, my party says this or that. You think about what's best for the child and what's best for the child in education. I'm sorry to say that we haven't made more progress in Kansas, but I'm also here to say that as long as I chair that committee and as long as people elect me, I'm going to fight for this. One other thing that I just have to mention, since we're here on behalf of AFP and Milton Friedman, and that's Celebrate Freedom Week. Just a little week set aside to talk about our founding fathers and the history of our country. It's a week to celebrate America and our beginnings and all of the things that make us great. And it's an opportunity across the districts for there to be just a kind of an atmosphere of excitement. That bill was brought by Representative Kelly Meigs to our committee, and the discussion over 1 week of covering our heritage was appalling. Absolutely appalling. And then, when it came to the House floor, hour and a half debate, I think we had, an hour and a half debate on whether or not we can teach children about our founding fathers. Well, you can't do it because it's a mandate. It's a mandate when you set a week aside. Well, I am telling you, but one of these days I'm going to list the big book of excuses. It's a big book of excuses as to why we don't educate children in the way that they deserve to be educated. Oh, we don't have enough money to do that. We have enough money to do that. We have enough money to do that. Which, let's not even get on the money thing, because that could take a whole lot longer. But I do want to end with this, because I think I've probably blown by my time, and I have so much more to say. I really do. I don't know if it was either Ben Stein or Phil Donahue that just said Milton Friedman had the heart of a warrior. And I hope I have the heart of a warrior. I hope I do. One of the things that I really pride myself on is I try to approach my job up here very purely and not be taken off focus by certain things. And I need everybody in this room to have the heart of a warrior, because if you don't, we will not. Milton, we will not recapture it. We won't. And I don't want to be the Debbie Downer, but unless we step out of our comfort zones, unless we step out of our daily routines, and like I said, I know it's inconvenient. It is. And unless we stand for truth and we stand for freedom and we stand for good ideas, because what is the opposite of bad ideas with bad behavior? Good ideas with good behavior. And we have a whole generation of children that could have great ideas, that could go into the workforce ready to work, excited about what they're doing, excited about capitalism, excited about the free market, excited about the fact that they were educated to their abilities, that someone understood they're good at flying a plane. Hey, we can teach them all kinds of science around planes because that's the way their mind works. What are we waiting for? I hope we're not waiting until we're at the utter brink, hanging on by our nails to finally say it's time to get serious. Please, have the heart of a warrior. Find a friend. Encourage them to have the heart of a warrior, because if we don't do it now, we won't ever get the chance. Thank you.
No, they're not saving the best for last. Most of you know who I am. I'm Jim Mullins. I'm with Americans for Prosperity. Alan Cobb got me started as a volunteer in 2004, and Alan is here. Thank you, Alan, for all that you've done for AFP and Kansas. And then I went to work for him in 2007, and he actually paid me money to have as much fun as I do have. So I try to make liberals gnash their teeth as much as possible. And my mentor on that was Jesus. You know, he took the Pharisees and he was always making them gnash their teeth because he would tell them something. And I live in Lawrence, Kansas, the People's Republic. They over there, those liberals asked me, said, "I can't believe you said that." And that's when they gnash their teeth. So I do that. I just want to make sure that Jack and Cindy Sossaman, I'll get it straight in a minute, Jack, I'm sorry, Cindy. They are our chapter leader. We have a new chapter in Shawnee County. We're getting ready to start one in Johnson County as well. And one of the things we're doing is we're trying to educate ourselves on issues. We're reading books, and then we're having discussions on those books. We're having speakers come in. We're meeting about twice a month at our office at 24th and Topeka Boulevard. There'll be notices coming out about that. Keep aware of that. You're welcome to come. We hope you do. One of the things that Milton talked about, and Johnny, you talked about, and Kasia talked about as well, is we have a problem in Kansas, but it's all across the country. It's called the uninformed voter. They are uninformed of what really is taking place and what the problems are. And I know that there's some moves underway at the state party office over here. This young man, I can't think of your name, I'm sorry. Josh. Yeah, Josh. I'm old, Josh, so that's why I don't remember everything. But Josh is working to put together some good information so we can take and get some of these uninformed voters and get them involved and make them aware of the issues that are affecting them and their families. Then one other thing that I would like to give you is that if you don't have my email address, I have cards here that I'll give it to you. 2 years ago, I sat in a meeting in Johnson County, put on the Kansas Policy Council to talk about public education. And they had the superintendent of Indiana at the time, the state superintendent of Indiana, they had the state superintendent from Florida, and they came in and they had a number of other people from different professional organizations, and it was an all-day situation. And what I did 2 years ago was I thought, you know, this is a whole day. How can you put this down so that your friends across the street or your neighbors or so forth and so on will read what you just found? So I put that together 2 years ago, and I will make it available to you. It's a front and back of a sheet of paper, so you can even print it off if you want to. But it's something that we need to be aware of. That Florida did in 1999 because of a thing that Jeb Bush put together, that we think our children, and there Florida is about 50% minorities, we're about 30% in Kansas, that those kids can do better. And in 10 years' time, they went from 30th in the country on the NAEP national test to 19th in 10 years. Now that's marvelous. And it has nothing to do with gene pool. It has nothing to do with whether they're Hispanic or black or white. Because the black and Hispanics were all moving up at the same rate as the white kids as far as improving on their testing. So it's not a question of whether they're poor inner city kids. Parents in poor inner cities, not all of them, but a great number of these parents love their kid just as much as we do. And they want the very best for their children just like we do. And so anyway, Jeff asked me to say a few words. He didn't know I was going to say this many, but that's okay. He can fire me tomorrow, okay, Jeff? All right, thank you for your coming. We really appreciate you being here. Let's take the education establishment on. Let's kick their butts. Let's change things. Let's do that. Thank you.
You're dismissed.